Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. We are so grateful that everyone joined us here today and really thrilled to have this gathering here in the Capitol Visitor Center. So thanks so much. I am Melysa Sperber, and I'm the director of the Alliance to End Slavery and Trafficking. And we are a U.S.-based coalition of 11 human rights organizations that work together to advocate for solutions to prevent and to end human trafficking and modern slavery. We are here today because of the enormous generosity and support of Senators Blumenthal and Portman. They together chair the Senate caucus to end human trafficking, and we value their leadership and are so grateful for their support today. In particular, I want to thank Sophie Friedman from Senator Blumenthal's office, who is instrumental in putting together the logistics that made this event possible today. I am honored to be here today with 5 individuals who are uniquely qualified to talk about what we all, as policymakers and advocates, can do to help prevent and end human trafficking. The facts about human trafficking are disturbing. Human trafficking is a $32 billion industry, second only to drug trafficking as an organized crime. Between 21 and 30 million people are enslaved worldwide. It is estimated that in this country alone, 14,000 to 17,000 people are trafficked into the United States. Calls to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, operated by our coalition partner Polaris Project, have increased from 5,700 in 2008 to over 20,000 calls in 2012. While we believe some of this increase is due to a raise in awareness about the hotline, we also feel strongly that it's due to a rise in the incidence of trafficking here in the United States. And while these numbers help us to understand the scope of the problem, what we can never fully understand as advocates and practitioners is what it is like to be trafficked, what it is like to lose your identity, to experience extreme brutality, to be enslaved, and then when you're finally free, what it is like to recover and overcome that trauma. Our panelists today speak with experience and expertise gained from working with advocates, from working with survivors, law enforcement, and the private sector. I know their words will inspire us to work together more closely and effectively to end modern slavery. Shandra Woworuntu is an anti-trafficking advocate and a leader of the survivors leadership group Voices of Hope, which is operated through our coalition partner Safe Horizon in New York City. Shandra draws on her personal experience and her extensive knowledge of international labor rights to educate, inform, and motivate others to become advocates to end slavery. In 2013, I was honored to work with Shandra as part of Vital Voices Global Leadership Global Freedom Exchange, supported by Hilton Worldwide. She was selected to represent the United States. Thank you for being here, Shandra.
Thank you, Melysa. It is good to be here today with all of you in this room. I'm going to talk about how easy it is lured to human trafficking victim into the United States and what the U.S. government can do to stop it. In my native Indonesia, I was a college graduate, financial analyst in International Bank, and I lost my job in 1998 because of political turbulence and its fallout, and I expanded my job search to United States. After responding an advertisement for one job in hotel in Chicago, I checked the legal document, paid the recruitment fee, and I flew to New York City. I entered the United States with lawfully non-immigrant visa arranged through the recruitment agency that brought me here. I was picked up at JFK by a man that affiliated with my trafficker, and shortly thereafter, however, our passport forcibly removed, and we were threatened, and we realized that we were trafficked into sex slave. I managed to escape from the small bathroom window by jumping out, and I was safe. I cooperated with law enforcement to prosecute my trafficker, and Safe Horizon New York assisted me to be independent and stay legally in United States. What I want you to know is a stronger regulation of foreign labor recruiter would have prevented my nightmare in the first place and would save thousands more from similar fate. Labor recruiters and contractors are directly involved in the trafficking and exploitation of workers in United States who enter the country lawfully. They make false promises about American jobs and charge workers with highly recruitment fee and force workers to stay in abusive or exploited worker conditions under debt bondage. I know several trafficking survivors who paid up to $20,000 fees for the job that didn't exist. In most cases, they borrowed the money from people, bank, or loan shark in their home country that expect to be paid back, now exploited, trafficked, and unpaid. They cannot pay back this loan, and this created debt bondage. Congress has an opportunity to help prevent this kind of abuse. The Fraudulent Overseas Recruitment and Trafficking Elimination Forte Act of 2013, or called HR 3344, will deter human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation by, number one, requiring the workers coming to United States receive the accurate information about the job, visa, and working condition. Number two, ensuring that no recruitment fees charged to the workers. Number three, requiring that recruitment agency registers with the Department of Labor. And the last, number four, enforcing the penalty if the law is not followed by recruitment agencies. I encounter men, women from all over the world who have experienced human trafficking in some form. They are from different nations, cultures, backgrounds, but many have one thing in common. They were brought to this country by a seemingly reputable recruiting agency. With an estimate 14,000 individuals trafficked into this country each year, and its problem that needs to be addressed. And HR 3344 is important part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Shandra. And we're so pleased in the Senate, as part of comprehensive immigration reform, Senators Rubio and Menendez were among the biggest champions of passing regulation to improve oversight over foreign labor recruiters. And we're so pleased that the House of Representatives now has an opportunity to follow suit and to pass legislation, the Forte Act that Representative Royce has introduced. We think that that's a huge opportunity and could singularly change the landscape of trafficking by preventing it before it really begins. Our next panelist is Ima Matul, and Ima is a survivor coordinator at our coalition partner, CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. She is a powerful advocate, and she advocates for the rights of all human trafficking survivors, particularly looking at the role of immigrant laborers in the U.S. Ima makes regular visits to Washington. We joked yesterday she might need to get an apartment here soon to meet with congressional and administrative representatives. In 2012, President Obama recognized Ima for her great work as a hero at the Clinton Global Initiative. Thank you for being here, Ima.
Oh, thank you, Melysa. Thank you all for being here. Good morning. Happy Monday. Well, I want to talk about the step Congress should take to prevent the trafficking of children in the United States. It is sad truth that American most deprived children, those who are in the child welfare system, are also among the most vulnerable to human trafficking. We also know that child trafficking victims too often do not receive services to address their unique need once they enter the system. As the survivor coordinator of the National Survivor Network, I am moved by the many stories I have heard of children who should have been protected, but were not. Christina was 12 years old when she first approached a homeless youth center. She reported that her mentally ill mother boyfriend was physically abusive to her entire family. The counseling center contacted child welfare, and Christina and all her siblings were placed in a different home. Feeling unsafe, Christina eventually returned to her mother, where an adult couple recruited her into prostitution for 2 years. My good friend Evelyn was 9 years old when she left Cameroon on the promise of a better job, but instead was physically and verbally abused and forced to cook, clean, and care for other small children 24 hours a day. She escaped after 7 years with the help from a member of her local church. Evelyn bounced around to several foster care and was told not to tell her foster parent that she was in trafficking situation. So she received no support to help her to recover. These are just 2 stories of many. I know the importance of supporting these children because I am trafficking a survivor myself. I came to America in 1997 when I was 17 years old, believing I would work as a nanny in Los Angeles. Instead, my trafficker took my passport, physically and verbally abused me, and forced me to work 18 hours a day or more. I was fortunate to escape and receive support from the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, which allowed me to rebuild my life. Evelyn, Christina, and so many others like them deserve the same chance to live well after surviving the trauma of being trafficked. Since the child welfare system is the best channel through which to deliver much needed services, We must ensure the system is ready to identify and respond to victims, as well as counsel children at risk. One important step toward doing that is through legislation that is already being developed. Last year, the House and the Senate introduced identical legislation that aims to strengthen the child welfare system. In the House, U.S. Representative Karen Bass and Tom Marino introduced H.R. 1732, which currently has 43 co-sponsors. In the Senate, Senator Marco Rubio and Kay Hagan introduced a companion bill as 1823. I would like to thank them for their effort and ask the other legislators to support them, to join them. And what would this legislation do? First, the legislation directs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to publish a guideline that will help child welfare agencies serve the at-risk population by encounter. It also calls for the state plan that ensure welfare agencies make effort to identify and document the trafficking victim they encounter and report their findings within 72 hours to law enforcement. Finally, it requires states to have procedures to help them assess and identify trafficking victims and provide comprehensive training and services to serve such victims. I am very pleased that this legislation emphasizes providing for two types of trafficking victims: those forced into sex slavery as well as child labor. Each type of victim requires specialized services, and it's important that people are trained to recognize the signs of trafficking. Trafficked children deserve our courage and commitment, and it will take action to end a great injustice as well as help those who experience them. I ask all members of Congress to stand up and support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ima. We're very grateful for your remarks, and I'm particularly grateful that you mentioned not only the issue of children who are trafficked into the sex trade, which is very much and rightfully so in the news, but also the issue of children forced into labor trafficking. And that is a problem like you described in the case of your friend Evelyn. Children are forced to work in farms and restaurants, factories, as well as households as domestic laborers. And these children are less visible, but it's so important that we not lose sight of them. Our next two panelists are going to help us understand the needs of trafficking survivors and the ways in which the federal government can better address and respond to those needs. Beth Jacobs is a social worker, an educator, a public speaker, and founder of Willow, a Tucson, Arizona non-governmental organization dedicated to supporting and empowering victims of sex trafficking. Beth is a tireless advocate for stronger anti-trafficking policies in Arizona. She is often called upon to speak to local and state legislatures, and she recently appeared with Cindy McCain of the McCain Institute and the Polaris Project to roll out a new billboard campaign in Arizona to raise awareness in that state. Thank you so much for being here, Beth.
Well, thank you, Melysa. And thank you, everybody, for being here to listen to our issue. I'd like you to imagine that a young woman is kidnapped as she's walking home from work. Her kidnapper threatens her life and forces her to rob a convenience store. Should she be charged and held legally accountable for that? Put it this way. It is clear how absurd it is to criminalize the victim, and yet real men and women trafficked in the sex trade are regularly tried and convicted in America's courtrooms. And I know this is true because I am one of those trafficking victims. For more than 20 years, I've been living an absurd reality in which I am a criminal in the eyes of the law. Each state has the right to decide how long they're going to hold your criminal background against you. And the state that I live in is Arizona. I'm required to tell prospective employers about my criminal background, that I was trafficked. I have prostitution charges from that. And I have to tell them for 99 years. So when I'm 117 years old and apply for a job, then I don't have to tell them that I was a trafficking victim. So we need to change that. I got hired by the state of Arizona as a child protection sex crimes investigator because I have a lot of experience in sex crimes. They fingerprinted me, they wanted a clearance card, and 1 month later they let me go because I had 9 charges that came up from 1980 to 1983. This was in 2012. So even though I got out, went through my healing process, I went to college, got a BSW, I worked with women just like me for another 15 years in the state of Minnesota. I moved to Arizona, and all of a sudden I'm a criminal again. Not good. Very traumatizing, actually. I feel like I've rehabilitated myself already, and it just doesn't seem like justice is being served. Despite being arrested hundreds of times for prostitution-related crimes before I was 21, nobody ever tried to intervene in any proactive, positive way at all. To make matters worse, even though I was a child, I got fingerprinted as an adult because that's part of the grooming process. They take everything from you. They take your belongings, your clothes, your jewelry, your ID, and they also take your name and your age. They told me my name was Julie and that I was 21 when I was 16. So when I was 17, I was 22. And somehow, in the end of all this, the charges from when I was really 16, it looked like I was 21. So some of them stuck on my name, and it's a huge process to get that off. I got my degree in social work, launched a career helping women get out of the sex industry. I've started an agency in Arizona called Willow. It's survivor-run, survivor-driven. And I think it's important that we address this issue because many other women like me will be denied jobs just like I have because of their criminal backgrounds. And I think a lot of people don't think about that issue when they think about women getting out and healing. Today, Arizona is on the cusp of righting this wrong. Last year, a governor-appointed task force published a report recommending Arizona improve on how it addresses trafficking, which is wonderful. It is my hope that Governor Brewer will make it a priority to push legislation that addresses the needs identified by the task force to ensure that trafficking victims are not treated as criminal and that the victims receive more access to needed services. And they do have that laid out very nicely in the plan they made. I hope that you will join me to do whatever we can to make sure the law is enforced, to make sure that law enforcement, service providers, all of us recognize trafficking survivors as victims of a crime who deserve support and specialized services and not condemnation and blame. Please stop the life sentences. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. It is unthinkable to know that someone who has suffered the grave injustice of human trafficking would be treated as a criminal, and yet your story is proof that it can and it continues to happen here in the U.S. It is also difficult to truly understand the complex needs of survivors and then to craft federal policies that can be responsive to those needs. Our next panelist, Margeaux Gray, is an independent artist, anti-trafficking advocate, and survivor. She uses art as an extension of her voice to educate, inspire, and empower others. Margeaux created the beautiful image behind us that is entitled Ocean in a Drop. Margeaux, thank you for sharing your work with us, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Melysa. Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay. This is my first time speaking in front of a group like this, and being here marks an important part of my survival. Let me explain. I was trafficked as a very young child. I was taken to private residences and hotels, then auctioned off to anyone willing to pay. Despite numerous, unexplained, very grown-up health problems, no physician ever asked whether I was being abused, much less trafficked. Not once. When I finally escaped at 18, the first nightmare ended. I learned quickly that my own isolated horror would be difficult to move beyond. Consequently, I have struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, an eating disorder, peripheral neuropathy, adrenal insufficiency, and blindness, all related to the trauma of sexual and physical abuse. I have battled to put the suffering behind me, and being able to sit up here confident enough to tell my story and advocate for change, this is truly a milestone in my recovery. I have come to know that a trafficking survivor is never 100% free until we rid ourselves completely of the trauma's effects. That doesn't happen overnight. It's an evolution. And it doesn't happen without a personal commitment and help. We are failing victims by not adequately providing them with essential services that will help them become a true survivor. For me, if it were not for art therapy and other psychological services that I received, I very well would not have survived even after I escaped my trafficker. I would not have the courage to speak out against the injustice of human trafficking. Earlier this month, Congress passed an appropriations package to fund federal anti-trafficking organizations or programs for the fiscal year of 2014. And there were actually increases in funding for victim services the first 10 years that funding has risen. This is a big win and an important one, because every year an increasing number of cases are identified through calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. But this is just the first step, and we need this funding and more, simply to provide the critical emergency services, shelter, food, and emergency medical care. For the growing number of trafficking victims, and we need to go beyond emergency care and services. We need a national commitment and financial investment to train doctors, psychologists, workers, social workers, and providers so that they can better understand the unique struggles and provide the services trafficking victims need to truly survive. I believe strongly that access to psychological services should be a legal right. For every survivor of human trafficking, there should be no limitations on that. And when the service is made available. The process of recovery can be slow and unpredictable, like recovery from any post-traumatic stress disorder. The United States has been seen as a leader in the fight against human trafficking. I'm proud of many things our country has done. My hope is that policymakers will make a much stronger commitment to end modern slavery and provide every trafficking victim with the services that they need to restore their mind, body, and spirit, so that they can all become true survivors like me.
Thank you, Margeaux. I think I can speak for everyone here to say we are so happy to share with you and to celebrate this milestone in your recovery. Your story is so inspiring, and as you mentioned, we did have a big win when the Omnibus Appropriations Bill passed, and we saw support for victim services increase for the first time in a decade. And yet what we know is that we are still woefully under-resourced when it comes to being able to meet the needs of trafficking survivors. And we hope that Margaux's story and the others that you've heard will motivate you and all of us to continue to work on increasing services as we look towards FY 2015 and the appropriations bills that will pass on victim services support. Our final panelist is James Kofi Annan. And he is going to talk about human trafficking overseas. James has won many awards for the work that he has done to combat human trafficking and the worst forms of child labor. Last year, he was awarded the World Children's Prize, an honor previously bestowed on the late Nelson Mandela. James founded Challenging Heights in 2003 to protect and improve the lives of young people in their communities affected by child trafficking and the worst forms of child labor in Ghana. From the age of 6 to 13, James was forced to work in the fishing industry on Lake Volta. He escaped, then sought a university degree, and rose to become a manager in Barclays Bank of Ghana. In 2007, James resigned his position at the bank to pursue his passion full-time and devote all of his efforts to Challenging Heights. We thank you for coming such a long way here, James, to be here with us.
Thank you, Melysa, and thank you for having me. I want to say a little bit about human trafficking in Ghana and what my organization, Challenging Heights, is doing. Then I will talk about important role the United States government can play in preventing and ending child trafficking overseas. In fishing communities along Lake Volta, Ghanaian children are being sold into life of forced labor, malnutrition, abuse, and non-schooling. Traffickers prey on poor families in communities along the country's coast. Typically, the families are told by the traffickers that if they let their children come to the lake, they will live with them and go to school in exchange for a few hours of work after school. In reality, the children are forced to work long hours on the boats and dangerous conditions. A typical day might begin at 3 a.m. and end at 8 p.m. and include challenging tasks such as casting net, diving, and hauling with only one meal served. Children often get stuck in the net at the bottom of the lake. If a child is caught escaping, the consequences can be brutal. Often, the families do not hear from their children again. I formed Challenging Heights about 10 years ago because I was a child slave myself who was forced to work in fishing boats along the Volta Lake as a young boy. I understood the challenges of surviving such a trauma, and I also saw the tremendous potential to change things in my country, to prevent child labor, to rescue children from slavery, and to give those survivors a chance for a good life. Today, Challenging Heights runs 7 different projects. We help prevent child trafficking from taking place by helping vulnerable children to go to school, creating awareness and building community capacity to stand up against trafficking. We also have a 65 capacity survivors rehabilitation center and a child trafficking survivor support network aimed at providing protection for vulnerable children. I feel proud of our accomplishment, but I know that there is so much more we need to do to stop trafficking in Ghana and throughout Africa. The United States government plays an important role, and I just want to say a few things about that. First, the U.S. Government Department Trafficking in Persons report issued each year is a useful tool for Ghana and other governments, helping to keep them accountable for continuing to do better work to stop trafficking. Each year, I contribute to the report so it reflects the most up-to-date reality facing trafficking survivors in Ghana. I host U.S. government officials, showing them firsthand the dire situation facing children at risk of exploitation and trafficking. The Department of Labor's Bureau of International Labor Affairs also plays an important role in this regard. The Bureau does a number of important things that affect trafficking in Ghana and other countries. First of all, it conducts research on international labor, child labor issues, forced labor, and human trafficking, and publishes very valuable reports on the worst incidences of child labor and lists of goods produced by child labor and forced labor. Second, the Bureau funds projects for organizations engaged in efforts to eliminate exploitative child labor around the world, and it assists the development and implementation of U.S. government policy on international labor, forced labor, and human trafficking issues. One thing I am concerned about, though, is that this important bureau retains its resources and expertise to address the most intractable forms of child labor and exploitation. Even as gains are made in reducing the prevalence of child labor worldwide, rare and complex problems remain. My request today is for Congress to consider a legislation that would secure permanent resources for the Bureau of International Labor Affairs and insulate it from political shifts. I also believe that the U.S. government can improve the implementation of all its development programs by integrating an anti-trafficking lenses in all those programs. Whether it is building a school, constructing a highway, or distributing food aid, the U.S. government must integrate strategies for preventing, identifying, and responding to trafficking issues. Everyone, including myself and all of you, has a role to play in ensuring that children do not fall victim to the traffickers who prey on them. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and thanks to all of our panelists. This perspective each of you brings is invaluable. So many people here in Washington, in the advocacy community, and on Capitol Hill, in the administration and federal agencies, care deeply about this issue, and they all want to make a real difference. But it is difficult, impossible really, for us to understand what it is like to be trafficked. Today, you have helped each one of us to do that. I want to ask, before we open it up to the audience, a few questions. The first one means we have to let go of some constraints and to think what we would do if each one of us had a magic wand that eliminated all the barriers, be they economic, political, or social, that we know do exist to combating trafficking and modern slavery. If you could wave this magic wand, what is the single step you would ask Congress to take to prevent and to end human trafficking? Shandra?
Yes, I love to have that one. As we know, U.S. government is a leader in this issue, and U.S. government had a strong and wonderful laws to combat human trafficking, and I want to see the law achieve as they promised. So I hope the law will be enforced more and more and more. This is my magic wand.
Thank you, Shandra.
Yeah.
Ima, what would you do with the magic wand?
To prevent trafficking or to end trafficking, if I have a magic wand, or the Congress or government, whoever, to end poverty. Because of poverty, we, victim, end up being vulnerable and being a prey upon a trafficker. So if we could end poverty, we could all have a better education, a better job, and not being a fall prey into a trafficker.
Thanks, Ima. Beth, what would you do?
Okay, well, my magic wand would make a federal law that supersedes all state laws to serve trafficking victims. And from housing to employment to criminal backgrounds, it would vacate and dismiss all charges, and it would listen to survivors, and it would let us rehabilitate ourselves and let us live prosperous, fulfilled lives and live happily ever after.
The end.
James?
Yes. Anytime I come to America, I see that there is a consumer awareness in this country. So everybody, when there is an issue, everybody tries to look at what is the supply chain like. So there's a strong consumer awareness here. Unfortunately, in Ghana and Africa, probably as well, we don't have that educated population to be consumer aware. So our biggest consumer is American government. I mean, there are a lot of things that are done with regards to international relationship with America. I would like the government of America to be our consumer and put pressure on our government to implement the very laws that protect its own citizens, so that anything that is done for our country, for instance, it can have it as one of the conditions to implement laws that affect trafficking survivors.
Thank you, James. And Margeaux, what would you do with your magic wand?
I would protect children who are vulnerable. I would work with HHS and Department of Education to implement and come up with a mandatory plan to educate teachers and educational professionals, along with social workers, psychologists, and those in the human service field, to better identify to first, number one, have an understanding of what trafficking is and the complexity that it's not, it's not a cookie cutter situation, that there's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and under that it's an umbrella. So, and number two, I would then help them to better identify a trafficking victim. And three, I would have services set up for each of those, that would attune to that survivor and would help them empower themselves, because as I said in the, my speech, that there's two steps. It has to come from you, and it also, we need help. So I would make sure that those services are available to help a trafficking victim become a survivor, and hopefully then that would, by proxy, to eliminate trafficking or decrease it. Thank you.
Thank you, Margeaux, for that articulate answer. So my second question acknowledges that we exist in D.C. in a very polarized environment, and one that is facing enormous and understandable fiscal constraints. And yet we do see policymakers and practitioners coming together on this important issue. And we were pleased that there were additional resources for survivors in the last appropriations negotiation. Why do you think that trafficking is an issue that brings us together? What do you think, Ima?
It's because it's require all of us to work together, to collaborate together, and work together to end this issue. It doesn't matter who you are, Democrat, Republican, teachers, law enforcement, social workers, all of you, individual. We need to come together to end this.
Thank you, Ima. And Beth, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a human rights issue. It affects men, women, children. It affects us all. It does not discriminate. From Democrat to Republican, we all need to stop human trafficking as a community and as a nation. We have to work together.
Thanks, Beth. My last question before we hand it over to the audience is to ask each of our panelists what the one thing is that they most want the audience to leave here today understanding. Shandra?
Okay, thank you. Since I tried to learn more about foreign national survivor and related with human trafficking, I'm asking you to co-sponsor HR 3344, because this is one way to deter foreign worker, victim of human trafficking, labor exploitation, or forced labor into the United States. So this is my passion to be passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ima?
For me, first, thank you all for being here and listen to us. What I want you to take away today is think what we all, each of us, speak about today, and educate yourself, and also talk to your family, your neighbor, your community, to talk about the issue, and educate yourself. What is human trafficking? How can you help? How can you identify victim, and what can you do as an individual?
Thank you, Ima. Beth?
Well, I'm going to go back to it does not discriminate. I mean, victims don't come from Prostitutionville in southern Arizona. They come from your families. They come from everywhere. It's your mothers, your sisters, your friends, church members. It's all of us. We're all at risk. And I think some people think they're far removed from it, and you're not. We have predators who are coming into our homes on the internet. So please talk to your kids. Don't try to protect them from that, because the pimps aren't trying to protect them.
Thanks, Beth. James?
Yes. Oftentimes, issues come up historically, and we wish that we were alive to be able to help to solve the problems. Today, we have been given an opportunity to act. The time to act is now. There will be no other opportunity, in future. So let us not regret that in the next 30 years, we will say, oh, I wish I had acted. The time to act is now.
Thank you, James. And Margeaux.
I would say to empower yourselves, you need to empower others. And slavery must end, but it won't end unless we come together, and that you have the power to be able to do that, to help in implementing and passing legislation such as H.R. 1732, the child welfare, and that if we come together, we can actually do this. I believe in my heart, in my deepest heart, that we can, and that this is a human issue.
Thank you, Margeaux. So I'd like to open up the questions to the audience now. My wonderful colleague Meredith has some handheld mics. So if you could raise your hand, and we'll take some questions from all of you. And if you could, when you ask your question, please stand up, identify yourself and your affiliation. Hi, Martina.
Hi, I'm Martina Vandenberg. I'm the president of the Human Trafficking Pro Bono Legal Center here in Washington, D.C. Thank you to all of you for your incredibly moving and brave comments. It's so wonderful to hear directly from you, because at this point you really are the leaders of the movement. My question, though, goes to this question of enforcement that many of you raised. The main effort, I think, in enforcement has been prosecutions, and so I would be interested to know whether any of these cases were prosecuted, how many cases are prosecuted each year in Ghana. I think it's important to remember that in the United States in 2012, there were only 128 federal prosecutions in the entire country. So what's the role of prosecutions and convictions in fighting trafficking? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Shandra. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, since you mentioned Ghana, I think I will take a go at it first. Well, that is why I made a passionate appeal that the American people can become our advocate. Because you're thinking about more than 200,000 children who are caught up in forced labor and trafficking in Ghana. And in the just past year, we had just about 75 prosecutions done, and only 75 investigations, 5 prosecutions, and 2 convictions. I mean, this is just almost nothing. If we did more, and I'm proud to say that my organization was associated with the first ever local prosecution under our human trafficking law, which was passed in 2005. And when we did that, a lot of traffickers returned children voluntarily, which means that there is potency in prosecution. And I think that we need to do much more.
Thank you, James. Chandra, did you?
Specific Ghana.
Oh, Ghana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Access.
Did anyone else want to speak? Okay.
Well, I can say something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Martina. Well, not that many cases that being prosecuted, even in the U.S., especially in labor trafficking cases, because the labor trafficking cases are, well, not just labor trafficking, also sometimes in sex trafficking, that the crime, human trafficking, is a hidden crime, that people could not identify that until the survivor or the victim themselves reported it, or someone that is really paying attention reported it. And so it's not that many cases. Like, I'm not an expert in the numbers of how many cases in being prosecuted or how many percent, but not that many cases are being prosecuted. And as attorney or prosecutor that is in this room, we need, your help to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ima. Chandra, you have...
Yes, maybe I want to add something from Ima information. Hi, Martin. Actually, some cases is done, like my case. It was involved about 5 nationality, but some of them didn't prosecute it because they still on the run. But U.S. government really think about that and do their job to prosecute. But some of the cases become cold case, and some of them become like done because of some of the victim went away to their country, so they cannot do like the right prosecution of the crime. I think this is the information that I can give you. Thank you.
Thank you for that important question. And I think from our coalition's perspective, we do hope to see that number rise, and we support those U.S. attorneys like the one in New York who recently took on really complex cases, and we hope that the attention remains on the survivors in those cases and not the perpetrators. So we look forward to seeing more bold prosecutions, even though we recognize the complexity and the complications in this area. Is there anyone else who has a question for our panel?
Hi, my name is Brian Harris. I'm with Interpress Service News. And I was reading that the Alliance is recommending legislation that would require businesses making over $100 million a year to report their supply chains to the public. I was wondering if there's any action underway in Congress to implement this proposal.
I'll answer briefly and then turn it perhaps to my colleague Ima. Right now, we don't have a piece of legislation introduced, but Representative Maloney in the House of Representatives and we believe also Representative Smith are supportive of an introduction. It has been introduced in past Congresses. What we do have is a law in California that CAST was instrumental in helping to pass that is similar in spirit and structure to the one that we hope to see introduced at the federal level. So perhaps I'll let Ima speak to the work being done on 657.
Yes. The SB 657, which is California Bill, the Supply Chain Act, that was passed about 2 years ago in 2012, I believe. And even though that this law has been passed 2 years ago, but it hasn't been being implemented. And we've been asking, even the California Attorney General been asking those corporation businesses to release if there is any trafficking or slavery involved in their supply chain. So that has been released either. And I believe ATEST requested that, right?
Yes, we have been requesting from the California Attorney General more information about their enforcement strategy. There's also a website called Know the Chain that the coalition has endorsed that catalogs several corporations, and whether they are in compliance with SB 657. So we do hope to see implementation be strengthened so that the promise of the law is achieved.
But I also noticed that recently Kmart, for example, just joined the movement and promised not to have a slavery involved in their supply chain.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Reed Mackey, Child Labor Coalition. I wanted to ask James if he could talk about the challenges of getting the children out of slavery. Are you able to go in and rescue children, or do you have to wait for them to escape? How does that mechanism work?
Thank you. My organization actively rescues children from slavery, much as we do prevention. So we are not, as an organization, our focus is more of the survivors in terms of getting them out and then rehabilitating them and making sure that those who are vulnerable do not fall victims. We leave the law enforcement aspect to the law enforcers, though we provide pressure for them to prosecute. It will interest you to know that in 2012, we rescued over 100 children from slavery. And then last year, we have not done the count yet, but we are above 100 cases. So that's kind of the work that we are doing. But as I said, in order to solve this problem quickly, and we believe that we can solve this problem within the next 20 years, we need every aspect to work. Prevention, rescue, law enforcement, every aspect to work in order that we can achieve our goal.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Reed. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Mary Ellison, and I work at the State Department Trafficking in Persons Office. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for sharing your stories with us. I'm wondering, obviously events like this raise really important awareness within Congress as well as the government. I know all of you are doing so much to raise public awareness in your own communities and in your own countries. And I'm just wondering if you have had discussions or have ideas about what you think that the U.S. government should be doing in addition to what it's already doing to raise greater public awareness about human trafficking and how people can take action to get involved to stop it.
I'll start by giving an example. Quite recently, you know, this Millennium Challenge account, Ghana was given the second tranche to work with. I'm expecting that before the second one was approved, our government will be asked questions why we are still in Tier 2 and why we slipped to Tier 2 watch list a couple of years ago. I mean, this would have brought tremendous awareness for government to know that if I need more support from America, I'm going to be asked some of these questions. So I have to start acting now. I think that's very important. And I have had the opportunity to speak to various corridors of power, including even coming to this place. I remember a couple of years ago when I spoke to a Congressional committee on this issue. We don't have a lot of opportunity to speak to selected privileged groups like you. The opportunity is not created. Even to see a minister or minister's assistant, the kind of processes that you go through before you get there, it's a lot. So that's why I'm grateful that you've given me this opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Yeah. And Shandra?
How U.S. government raise awareness and take action about that, it is huge issue, and this is kind of complicated because of all the government agents have to be together to raise awareness in their own stuff. They have to educate their staff first. And then they have to educate people who work in the front line to deal with the community. Because sometimes they don't know to identify. Like a doctor, when the patient enters to the clinic with some bruises or some skin problem, they cannot identify if someone come with them and speak on behalf of someone who's sick. They have to ask the patient in case they have like social worker come over and talk directly to them. In law enforcement, they have to educate their staff, especially in the front line, not only the highest people who have the position, because the officer who are on the field need to be educated because they deal directly with people, with the community. So it is more easier to the victim or the community to work together with law enforcement. And then Department of Education, like Margeaux mentioned, I'm agree with her that teacher, especially, and social worker need to be educated. Not only the principal, so it's kind of all the level of who sit in the government level, and then also it is for Department of State. Now I'm talking about Department of State. You have the proposal to have a video awareness that will run in all the immigration, U.S. immigration around the world is not implemented. And I ask you to do it as soon as you can, because this video awareness in the U.S. immigration and all around the world will help to prevent foreign nationals to enter the United States with lawful visa.
Thank you, Shandra. So much of what Shandra and James described does come down to resources. And what we know is that the Department of Education has 0 resources dedicated to trafficking. And yet there are dedicated people within that department pulling together what they can in order to be responsive to districts across the country that are interested in doing anti-trafficking work and educating their practitioners in schools. As James mentioned, there's also the Millennium Challenge Corporation and all types of other development and anti-poverty work going on all around the world, supported by the U.S. government. The U.S. Administration for International Development did release a counter-trafficking in persons policy that aims to integrate trafficking into food aid, infrastructure, public health. What we need now are resources to actually get that out there into the field to ensure that all AID personnel are trained and integrating a slavery lens into the anti-poverty work that they're doing. So it does come down to resourcing these efforts and putting our support behind the people who are at the front lines of being in a position to respond and prevent trafficking.
Can I also answer that question?
Absolutely.
Well, what the government could do also, U.S. have such a great law compared like to other country, and we just want to see that implemented. We have a great law, but we haven't seen as survivors who are sitting right here, haven't seen like any, little bit of changes. And as you know that the U.S. government just released their the strategic action plan, and me personally, myself would like to see that being implemented.
Thank you, Ima. And Margeaux, you had some thoughts too?
Yes. I think we need to educate our children and have, because as much as you would like to believe that this is not happening to children, that, we don't want to go there, it's a touchy subject, it's for the parents, not every parent is going to be a true parent, or it might be their parents. So, where do children learn? They learn in school. And I think that there needs to be some sort of program to, age appropriate, to understand, and this is speaking of child trafficking, both sex and labor, to understand what abuse and trafficking is, because sometimes it goes, trafficking is abuse. And that way, and also self-esteem builders, so that, because a lot of times children that are trafficked, or as they get older and into adults, they have low self-esteem, and this leaves them more vulnerable to be trafficked. So I think that needs to be part of the program as well. And number 3 is, I think it needs to speak, you have to think about how you advertise or, educate about trafficking. Because for me, if I saw something when I was being trafficked in school said, human trafficking, it exists or something, I would have just looked past it because I didn't know what trafficking was. So we have to think from a child's perspective, from a young adult's perspective on how to educate and empower our children.
Thank you, Margeaux. Do we have any other questions? Yes, we have one up here.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I always find hearing the survivor stories revitalizes me through the work week. I'm Jocelyn Bell. I'm from Shared Hope International, and we are partnering with an organization in Minnesota that is working with foster care families, trying to get them trained in providing services to victims of sex trafficking and just, providing a home for them in the proper kind of environment. But they're having trouble recruiting these families to come and receive the training. So I was wondering what you would say to these foster families if you could speak to them to just encourage them to open their homes.
There is a technique and strategy to go to the education to the foster family. Maybe the first you cannot say like, I want to come to educate about human trafficking. Maybe in simply way, the technique, the approach is the most important. If you don't have that technique, strategies in approaching them, you will not get it, even not only foster care. So you have to know what kind of foster care family that you work with, and then the psychological and the economic of the foster care itself, the family itself. So you have to use certain technique approaching, maybe, okay, let's come and sit, we have something to do nice, and then you start educate them in informal way. When they get into interesting feeling about this issue, you can go through the serious education and awareness. I think this is my perspective about approaching and education. Melysa?
Thank you, Shandra. And I know Shared Hope is a leader in engaging survivors themselves in training and advocacy, and I think that we all believe that survivors really hold the key to providing insight and expertise to families. Anyone else? Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Okay. Well, then I'm just going to have a few thank yous. I first want to thank our wonderful panelists. You are all doing so much to help policymakers and the public to understand what modern slavery looks like. And your voices are critical to the discussion about what needs to be done to prevent and end modern slavery, to stop treating victims as criminals, and to provide services that can help trafficking victims become survivors. I also want to thank the team that helped support all of us on this panel today, my wonderful colleague Meredith, Ann Brown, Aaron Kisner, and our media team, Pat and his crew, and Sharon taking pictures. So thanks to all of you. And finally, and perhaps most important to everyone who came to join this conversation today, we are so grateful that you came to learn more about this human rights crisis. I truly hope that you will take the information and perspectives that you heard today and make an even greater commitment to improving policies that can help us do a better job of fighting the battle to end human trafficking in the United States and worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you.